New beginning, let's go. Started back rocking the brown. Ever since we've been knocking them down. Baby said she wanna go to the game. Taught her how to say Padres gang. Started back rocking the brown. Ever since we've been knocking them down. Mitchell and Ness with the old school name. All of the homies holler Padres gang. Yeah, that.
What's up? And good day, everybody. Welcome on in, episode 156 of the Talking Friars Podcast and YouTube show. Guess what? We are here. It is opening day, April 7th, 2022, live on YouTube, on Twitter. Thank you, everyone, for tuning on in here. If you're listening on the podcast or replay, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever, I appreciate that as well. We got a lot to discuss today. Through this season, I unveiled before the season that I'll be doing pretty much daily pregame shows. Some days, just because of life, maybe it's not like a full pregame show like I'm doing now. But every day there will at least be some sort of video out that'll go as the pregame show. And so we have the pregame show, Padres Diamondbacks, before 9:40 Eastern time, 6:40 Pacific time, first pitch. But before we get to that, I'm kind of combining those two. We're going to get to all the big moves that have happened today. The Taylor Rogers acquisition, Paddack and Emilio Pagan being traded. Victor Caratini was yesterday, but we could touch on that a little bit. Where the Padres payroll is at after that Taylor Rogers deal. The Padres lineup today. We'll get to that as part of the pregame show. But the Padres had some roster decisions to make earlier today, and there are definitely some that I would deem as, put in the surprise category. But before we get to that today, we got our sponsor, GAGLIONE Bros Famous Cheesesteaks and Subs, is a sponsor of this episode 146 of the Talking Friars Podcast and YouTube show. They're going to be located at Petco Park, inside Petco Park, all season long like they have been. They'll be, at least from what I know, down the third baseline, right by the Bally Sports pregame, postgame broadcast booth, just like usual. Located Sports Arena, Mission Gorge, Point Loma. GAGLIONEBros.com to view their entire menu and to give them a call as well. Their phone numbers will be there as well. Joe Gaglione and them over there, they are great. Have some great cheesesteaks and garlic fries. Great meal that you can have while watching some Padres baseball later tonight. So that's the sponsor of this episode. Just waiting for some people to get in here. Again, I really appreciate everyone for coming on in here on April 7th, opening day. Padres D-backs later tonight. Greg, hello. He says, Paddack's gone, hooray. Yeah, I think a lot of fans feel that way. And we're definitely going to get into Paddack, and it's kind of disappointing that he was traded for me because he was one of my favorite players personally, but also him being traded, that's obviously not what you wanted, right? You wanted him to flourish in a Padre uniform. You wanted him to, be that middle of the rotation type guy. In 2019, a lot of people, including me, were probably hyping him up too much and saying, he could be the ace and all of that. But at the same time, he was pitching really well. But his real expectation, or the expectations we could have put on him and probably should have put on him, was middle of the rotation, back end starter, something like that. Especially considering, I know in 2019, right, you had Gore, and I think he was initially drafted that year. So people were high on him. And so it seemed like Paddack, Gore, that would be a really good rotation. And that was obviously way before, Darvish came and Snell came and Musgrove and Clevenger. So that was a while ago. And so the reason why people, I think, were so high in saying that he was going to be, at the top was because there just wasn't much behind him. You still had Eric Lauer and Joey Lucchesi, right? You had Julius Chassin there for a little bit. So I think it's part of the reason he might have been overhyped was just because it didn't feel like the Padres had a ton of options, at least looking forward. And that was obviously before Preller went out and pretty much got a new entire rotation from outside the organization, now including Sean Manaea as well. So we'll get into Chris Paddack. Just trying to see here some more comments. Comment wherever you're watching from. Feel free. Again, this is like a national holiday for me, and I'm sure a lot of people. Opening day. Anthony asks, how do you feel about Nola leading off? We'll get to that in the pregame show kind of aspect of that after we discuss today's news, the roster, all of that stuff. All right, let's get to today. Starting with that Taylor Rogers move, it was put out there by Ken Rosenthal, by some other people last night, right, about the Twins being interested in Chris Paddack, and Taylor Rogers is the guy that the Padres wanted and were interested in. We weren't really sure at that point if it was just going to be a 1-for-1 like that, or if there was going to be multiple pieces in the deal, if Pagán was going to go and he ended up going, what the Padres were going to get back if something else went and it was, besides Paddack and something else went. So there's speculation there, and you couldn't really get your hopes up too much in terms of getting Taylor Rogers because of all the other moves this offseason that happened, not moves, but non-moves that didn't happen, right? Where you had Cruz, brought up out there that the Padres were finalists. You had Seiya Suzuki visiting Petco Park and Darvish having a conversation with him, and he ended up having a conversation with him about the Cubs, which wasn't really expecting that. You had that. You had Scherzer last year at the deadline, obviously. Freddie Freeman was out there by Bob Nightingale for a little bit. Castellanos and Bryant was out there before the lockout. So there were a lot of names. Jose Ramirez by Hector Gomez a couple of days ago. So there's been a lot of names that end up not being with the Padres. Dom Smith is another one, obviously, where a lot of the New York writers and Padre writers were reporting that a deal was close. And so my point is that there were just a lot of deals there, no deals where there was traction, but then there actually wasn't really traction. And it seemed like the reports of these deals didn't really help, those proposed deals get to the finish line. But this one did get to the finish line. And so this happened a little after 6 a.m. earlier today. The Padres acquired Taylor Rogers, a left-handed reliever from the Minnesota Twins, along with outfielder. He's had some major league time. Brent Rooker went to Mississippi State, was great there. And in return, the Twins got from the Padres Chris Paddack, starting pitcher, depth option it seemed like, and Emilio Pagán, who was going to go into this season, going to go into tonight, maybe getting that first chance to be the closer because there wasn't anyone that has locked down that position. But it seems like Taylor Rogers would be that first closer option for me at least. So that's the trade. Rogers, Rooker to the Padres, Paddack, Pagán to the Twins. There is a player to be named later. Yeah, Gil does ask that in the chat. Ben, do you know the player to be named later going to the Twins yet? Have not heard anything who that player is or who that player might be. Hopefully it doesn't turn into another Matt Brash situation, right, where that Mariners trade, the Taylor Trammell, Ty France, Munoz, they go to the Mariners. And in return, the Padres got Nola, Altavilla, Austin Adams, Taylor Williams, I think is his name. And the player to be named later in that deal going to Seattle is now on the Mariners opening day roster, and he throws gas. So that seems like that wasn't a great player to be named later that went to Seattle there and makes the trade even worse than what it kind of looks like right now for A.J. Preller and the Padres. So hopefully that doesn't happen, with the player to be named later going to the Twins, and it ends up being this lower prospect that we don't really think about, don't even mention, in podcast, YouTube shows like this or on the radio, don't even really care. We mention his name once because he's just part of the deal and you move on. And then a few years later, he ends up being something. You hope that doesn't happen. But no, we have not heard anything, Gil, about the player to be named later in the deal. But I just want to get to the impact that Rooker could have on this team, why I think this deal is a win for the Padres, what the Twins probably are looking at there, and just why Pregame and Paddack ended up in this situation, why they weren't able to have as much success, and it's kind of unfortunate, really. Getting to the positive point here, Taylor Rogers first, all-star reliever. And he was an all-star last season, like I just mentioned, 3.35 earned run average. He started as the Twins setup man. I believe he got like 30 saves at one point last year. He got to that point. Fastball, slider mix, really like that. Remember, his brother is on the Giants, so they're probably gonna get to play each other, this next week in that first at San Francisco series the Padres have this year. So that'll be cool. His brother is the one that pitches sidearm. I don't believe Taylor does, but I'd expect him to get that first shot to be the closer, because right now you don't have that concrete option, right? I mentioned earlier, Emilio Pagan was that. Seemed like him and Robert Suarez were probably going to get maybe that first shot at being the closer. But Pagan, everyone wants to flash back to that Dodger Stadium game where he gave up just a million home runs in that one inning. And he didn't think he was tipping pitches. No other Padres teammate told him he was tipping pitches. His velocity was there, and he was just giving up bombs. And so everyone's going to point to that, and they're going to say, I don't want that guy to be the closer. I still have the belief that he would have, bounced back for the Padres and had a better year, at least hopefully, to start out this year in comparison to the end of last year. But with Taylor Rogers, I mean, you can't deny the fact that this guy is going to help the bullpen, not just with his play, with his pitching, being an all-star last year, and hopefully he can continue that with the Padres, but also because he's a lefty, and that's another weapon for the Padres, right? You have Tim Hill, who before this deal happened, before this morning, and AJ was up at 6 a.m. making this deal, Tim Hill was the only lefty in the Padres bullpen. So it seemed like another year where, okay, you have a couple lefties in a row here in the seventh inning or something, and Bob Melvin's like, turns to Ruben Niembla, and he's like, who else are we going to go to here? We only have one lefty. We got to go to Hill here. And it seems like that felt like what it was going to happen. And obviously, teams nowadays, they value that right versus left matchup or that left versus right matchup. And so they don't want to just keep riding right-handers out there against lefties. And so in terms of right-left balance there, this will help. And it helps. It's not just another random lefty. It's a guy who was an all-star last year, right? So that's positive. And another thing that I saw that was very positive, and part of the reason that I'll get to why I think that this deal was a steal for the Padres for this year, is because of the contract. I mean, AJ is pretty much getting Taylor Rogers. He's getting the Twins to pay for Taylor Rogers' contract. He's getting the Twins to pretty much pay for the Padres, his closer's contract for this year. And I know I saw on the YouTube comments for the reaction video that I posted earlier this morning, and some were saying, oh, this is only a one-year deal. You can't be too excited about this, something to that effect. Saw a little bit of that on Twitter. It's like, aren't the Padres supposed to be trying to win this year? If they're trying to win this year, then why should you be mad about this deal, right? And I haven't even gotten to Brent Rooker, who they're going to have for 5-6 years of control. But I'm just talking about Taylor Rogers. Chris Paddack, he was going to be a depth piece this year, at least to start the season, piggybacking Snell. And now it seems like they'll do that with Chris Matt probably, as he's a righty and Snell's a lefty, and that can be a combination. Chris Matt made the roster. And we'll get to the opening day roster kind of breakdown a little early or a little later. But getting back to Paddack, okay, the Twins believe he has high upside and all that, and I was one of his biggest fans for anyone that knows me. But you got to realize, and I realize, that acquiring an all-star potential closer that is just going to go right in there, and we're not even paying $1 million, I don't think, of his salary this year. The Twins are pretty much paying all of it. That's a win for the Padres, and you only have to give up a guy that was a depth guy, someone that probably wasn't going to have a big role on this team. Now, injuries can happen, but you still have Reese Kinnear as a righty. You can bring up Gore. I know he's a lefty, but you can bring up him. You have Weathers still down there, who's starting, I believe, in El Paso later tonight. So there's still options, depth options. Free agency is obviously always an option. You need someone to fill in. So Paddack, acquiring Manaea, you have Clevenger coming back, who's a righty. Musgrove's a righty. It's just he just did not have a role on this team. It seemed like a more significant role than Taylor Rogers will have. I'll say that. And then you give up Emilio Pagan. Okay, look, you got to look at it this, right? Emilio Pagan goes, Rogers comes in. One, it's a lefty that comes in. Pagan's a righty. A lefty that comes in. And two, you save money. Pagan, the Twins, I believe, according to tweets I saw today by national writers, they're actually taking on salary in this deal, which means that they like having Pagan for, I think, 3 years of control. They like having Paddack for another, what is it? He debuted in 19, another 3 years. So they're definitely buying in on the years of control for someone that they believe they can get more out of in Chris Paddack, and someone in Taylor Rogers that they're okay with giving away and paying the contract because they get that guy back that they think can help that rotation, which needs arms. It's a very young rotation. They have someone, I think Joe Ryan starting opening day for them, who has had less than 10 starts in the big leagues. So that just shows you they need pitching. They need some more experience than what Joe Ryan has. And so they could argue that it's a fit for them. But getting back to the Padres fit, if you're trying to win right now, right, and that's what Peter Seidler said in his message to season ticket holders this morning, that they're trying to, he said something to the effect of, we're going to try to be a force to win the World Series in that World Series 2022 competition this year. If you want that to happen, you got to have a good closer or a good high tension reliever that can come in, right? And I think Taylor Rogers can be that guy. And so, especially you're not really paying his salary. You're paying $0.7 million of his salary this year to slot in probably as the closer. Free agent after this season, but you can always bring him back. And even if you don't, you still have Luis Garcia for next year. You still have Robert Suarez. Hopefully Pomerantz is healthy. You still have other options. Kevin Kopps will be up. I'm very confident he will be up sometime this year. He looked very good in spring training. Robert Gasser is another option. I'm not so sure that he would be a starter in the big leagues. Steven Wilson is on the roster. I was listening to the radio earlier today, and some people think that he could be that 7-8 inning type guy. So even if Taylor Rogers leaves after this year, they still have options. And then getting to Brent Rooker, he's 27. Only 27. He's played 65 games in the big league so far. And last year, he has power. Last year, he showed power at Mississippi State. I think he won the Triple Crown, which is pretty hard to do in college. 38 games in left field, 8 in right field, and 10 as the designated hitter last year in the big leagues. He combined for 29 home runs in the majors and the minors last season. The Twins were high on him. I know when he debuted, there was a lot of talk about him. But they still have Max Kepler there. I think they still have Alex Kirilloff there. Byron Buxton they signed to. Did they sign him? Yeah, I think they signed him to an extension. So their outfield's pretty locked in there. They bring in Carlos Correa to play short. I know that has nothing to do with Brent Rooker. But I think they believe that they still have some power in that lineup. And they're okay with parting with Rooker if that means that they can get Paddack, who seems like they really believe in, kind of like the Mets, and they can get Emilio Pagan. Let me confirm real quick. Emilio Pagan's contract. He's making $2.3 million this year, so that's going to the Twins. Paddack's making around the same thing, I believe. And so I did say so a few moments ago I did say Pagan has 3 years of control. He has 2. Paddack has 3. Pagan has 2 this year and then next year, and then he's a free agent after 2023, after the 2023 season. So they like the 2 years of control there, more control than Rogers. They like the upside, I guess, that they see in Paddack. They can get something more out of that fastball, get some more ride on that fastball. The fastball seemed a little flat last year. I don't think they're really buying into, we have to make that curveball a third pitch. I think it's more of let's make sure that changeup's great and really, hit the spots with the fastball and, really help that fastball get along there. And I think that I'm rooting for Paddack. I have family in Minnesota, so there's no other better team that I'd like him to go to than Minnesota. So, and then something else there, he reunites with Jay Stingler. But getting back to Rooker, because that's the Padres standpoint of it, 65 games, he is a power bat. He didn't make the opening day roster, but he's still, I think, going to impact the team this year. And he could be a good platoon with Beatty in left field if Profar, they decide, screw this left field thing, use him utility, or he gets hurt, something like that. I think that's a solid option. As from what I've heard, Rooker isn't the greatest defender, but neither is Beatty or Profar, so nothing really new there. They're doing that for the power that they see in Rooker. But, in this deal for the Padres, I think it's a win. Paddack had a 4.21 ERA in 3 years with the Padres, had a great start. It looked like an ace caliber pitcher to start 2019. But then was never consistent after that. Pagan became very expendable after struggling at the end of last season. Like I mentioned, I had a 4.83 ERA, negative 0.4 WAR, a 1.168 WHIP, and you usually want that WHIP to be below 1. And so it was over 1. So that was last year's stats for Pagan. So he became expendable. They get someone who's had more success recently than Pagan. They're not really paying him. This move puts them under the luxury tax, which we know Preller and Seidler wanted to have happen because they went over it last year, so they don't want to go over it again, because then that means that they'd have to pay 30% tax on however much they went over, and they don't want to do that. They want to reset it so that they can go over next year if they need to. And Seidler mentioned on Ben and Woods yesterday about him – not him, but the Padres in general, them promising that, look, we're still going to continue spending money on players. And so it seems like to me they want to get under, want to stay under by the end of the season, because that's what actually matters. They can go over again and then just get under again in terms of moves that they make, sorting money, putting money into different deals, taking it out in terms of money that's going into the luxury tax for the Padres. So they can get over it again and then go under, but right now they're under it, and that's where the Padres want to be, I believe. If they were going to go over it, you don't go over it for like a Daniel Hudson like they did last year, or for Taylor Rogers this year because it's only 1 year, right? You don't go over it for Sean Manaea even because it's 1 year. So they have acquired contracts where it's 1 year, right? Manaea, Rogers, Martinez is obviously multiple years, but if he has a good year, it is a 1 year deal because he has a player option after every year of his contract. So Preller's going pretty much the 1 year route for most of his deals that he did this season. And I think some of it is because of the moves that he's made in the past with Kim and Pomerantz and guys like that, Profar, because he knows that those guys are going to be there next year. And so he's just doing these 1 year deals. If it doesn't work out, don't bring him back. And if it doesn't work out, like let's say with Martinez, well, he comes back, but okay, You don't have to bring back Manaea. You don't have to bring back Rogers if it doesn't work out, right? So that I think that's a perspective that he liked, and why Preller, decided to pull the trigger on these type of moves, with Rogers, a 1-year deal, those 1-year deal those type of deals. And, they're trading for someone that could have power in the outfield, which is what they needed, right? With Profar being the left fielder and Beatty being, the backup platoon guy there in the outfield. They do have him listed as an infielder, Beatty, which is kind of weird, but it doesn't really matter. I think he's going to play more in the outfield than the infield, but maybe they're saying, Hosmer, hey, dude, better perform here, or Beatty might get some time here at first. Who knows? But look, they get Rooker for 5 or 6 years, which is more control that they have over Paddack, right? They get an all-star reliever last year coming in, and hopefully continues that this year. They're not paying the contract. I've said that already a million times, but I keep hammering that point because I think it's huge, because it keeps them under their luxury tax. And I think that's a victory for the Padres front office going into the season. Does that matter for any Padres fan? I don't think so. It's not our money. Well, technically it is for season ticket holders and people that spend money, because that does pay for the players' contracts. But in terms of the money, like, we're not actually signing the checks, right? It's Peter Seidler is. That's my point. So it's not really our money. So I don't think fans, most people watching or listening, really care about if they're over or under it. They just want a winning team, and I definitely agree with that. But for people like myself and knowing just how it works, and the front office does care, so in turn that kind of makes me care, because I'm looking at it, trying to look at it at least a little bit from their perspective, not just from a fan perspective. I think getting under that luxury tax was big. But, yeah, Paddack, Pagán, they kind of reached their point in San Diego. Don't know how much the Padres were going to get out of them this season. So I like the deal. Now, before we move on to this Padres roster, just trying to see through a little bit, going through the comments here, what people think. Johnny says Preller didn't steal anyone. I think it was a steal, because Paddack wasn't going to have a huge impact this year, at least to start the year. Pagán is not an upgrade from Rogers. Rogers is the upgrade from Pagán, in my opinion. It's a lefty, not a righty, which helps balance the bullpen. Let me know, Johnny, why you don't think Preller didn't steal anyone. You get a guy that could really be like a Hunter Renfroe, in Rooker. And then Rogers, facts are facts. He's the better pitcher right now than Pagán. Johnny brings up the point. Look how they made All-Star Adam Frazier like he was a struggling rookie. I don't think they made him that. He just didn't play better. He didn't play as well as he did in Pittsburgh. They didn't do it. Frazier just didn't play well. And looking back on it, yeah, it was a move that I think Preller made thinking that he was going to be able to trade Hosmer to the Rangers, and it ended up not happening. And so you had a clubhouse that maybe wasn't too happy about that, and Frazier didn't really fit, and they traded him in the offseason. Let's see here. Gil says we have Ray Kerr, Jose Castillo in AAA, Morejon, Palm coming back mid-season. Weathers, Gore, we have plenty of lefty arms now. I don't know about plenty. I mean, Preller, he always is going to want to go make upgrades, but I agree. I like Ray Kerr. Castillo's middle of the year as well, like Pomerantz at Morejon, so I wouldn't just put him in. I know he's throwing, but he's not going to make an immediate impact. And then Gore and Weathers, if they're not dealt, yeah, I think they're going to have an impact this year. So I agree. Lefties, they definitely improved their left-handed pitching corpse, if you will, with this trade. All right, let's move to the Padres roster. The Padres kind of roster breakdown. That roster was released earlier this morning. It had to be in by 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And there were some surprises. CJ Abrams obviously is the big headliner, right? He made the team. He isn't starting tonight, which we'll get to in the pregame show portion of this. But he is on the roster, and that's expected. Wearing number 77, which is kind of weird. He wore 87 in spring, so you would have thought, okay, why not just stick with that number? It was working for you there. Maybe he just wanted a lower number because he's in the big leagues, but it's not that much lower. I was more expecting, I know Grisham has 2, but a much lower number than 77. But he made the roster. Starting with the starting pitchers, we'll go through the entire roster here, name by name. Darvish, Musgrove, Manaea, Snell, and Martinez, just as expected. Darvish pitching later tonight. Musgrove going game 3. Manaea will go game 2 tomorrow. Snell and Martinez, I don't believe that they've had any order of who will pitch. Let me look at Twitter real quick just to see if there's any updates. Bob Melvin, breaking news, Bob Melvin has said, he said 10 minutes ago, that Taylor Rogers is the Padres closer. So all that speculating I just did about, yeah, he'll probably get the opportunity there. Yep, he is going to be the closer. He is going to be the closer, and that's expected. Because I don't think they were confident in Nelson Lamet out of the gate being a closer. I don't think they were confident in Robert Suarez being the closer. But going back to Snell and Martinez, it has not been put out there yet who's going to be starting games 4 or 5. So that's something to keep an eye on. But those 5 starters, those are going to be the 5 starters, not anything to really talk about much there. Austin Adams, here's the bullpen. Austin Adams, Nabil Crismatt, Javi Guerra, Pierce Johnson, Dinelson Lamet, Craig Stammen, Robert Suarez, Steven Wilson, Tim Hill, and Taylor Rogers. Rogers is the closer. I would expect Suarez or Adams, someone like that, to be the 8th inning guy, 7th inning. Tim Hill is definitely going to get probably some higher leverage spots, I would think, if matchups come into play. But getting to some surprises, and the surprises for me kind of start in that bullpen. Crismatt, now that Paddack was dealt, isn't a surprise. But Javi Guerra, I think, was a surprise. I know that he's out of options, so the Padres didn't want to give up on him. So that's why they wanted to have him on the roster. And so they were like, hey, we're having 28 guys on the roster. We don't have to pitch him if we don't want to, but let's keep him, let's keep him at least for now. Maybe work out a trade later once injuries happen or something, or if injuries happen, he can pitch. But just keep him on the team, because if they DFA him, some team's going to pick him up. That's probably what their thought process is, or process was. So that's why Guerra's on the team, but I don't really understand why you just put him on the roster. I understand. I just went into that. I know that might be a little contradictory, because I just went into me saying that they like Guerra and they don't want to give up on him, so they're just going to put him on the roster because he was out of options. But at the same time, if you're trying to win, don't you want to use that? Maybe he will be pitching in these big games. But I'm not huge on Javi Guerra. I see the velocity and all that, but I haven't seen a lot of consistency from him. And so would you rather have Javi Guerra on the team over Kevin Kopps, who looked really good? Would you rather have him over Ian Kroll, who's another lefty? I think that's a valid question to ask. So Guerra, I think that was definitely interesting. Steven Wilson, not surprised by. He was definitely a beneficiary, I think, of the 28-man roster. I was listening to the radio, John and Jim earlier today, and Kyle Glazer was saying that he could be a 7th and 8th inning type guy by the end of the season. I don't know about that, but the Padres are high on him, and he definitely will be getting into games. I believe that. But more of the surprise, the two kind of main surprises were Guerra for me. I'm just not that high on him. And then Jose Azocar in the outfield. The outfield is Jose Azocar, Trent Grisham, Will Myers, and Profar. They have Beatty as an infielder with Abrams, Cronenworth, Hosmer, Kim, Machado, and Voit. Voigt's obviously a DH, but they have him as an infielder. He'll play some first base probably. I'd like him to be the DH. I don't think that it would be smart for the Padres to just put him out there and, risk more injury, maybe have him get hurt defensively. I don't think that's too smart, when he can definitely add some power to that lineup if he can stay healthy all year. But as for the outfield, obviously Grisham, Myers, Profar, whatever, that's obvious. But Jose Azocar, that didn't really seem like it was going to be something that was going to happen. Like, from the roster projections that I was seeing, I wasn't seeing too many Jose Azocar, mentions to be in the outfield. He doesn't have a ton of power, and I get it's just a backup outfielder. He's not going to start, right? It feels kind of like a Jorge Mateo type stopgap backup outfielder type thing. Jake Marisnick, kind of what it feels. But for Jose Azocar, especially with the Brent Rooker addition, you would have thought that Rooker would have been on the opening day roster because Rogers is, right? Both Twins guys, Rogers is on it. So maybe the Padres want to just see if Rooker can get hot in AAA and then bring him up. If they want him to just get consistent at-bats and they know he's not going to get it here, I don't know. I think if he was here, I think he'd be more of a platoon situation. I think that's what would have happened. But the Azocar move, I think I would have rather had Rooker on the team over Azocar because of that power option. He could be that power option off the bench. When you look at the bench, there's not a whole lot of power there, right? You have Alfaro, but you usually don't want to pinch hit catchers because what if your starting catcher gets hurt, right? Then what happens? So that you don't really want to do that. Now, I know there's the DH, but there are going to be some situations where the Padres are losing late in games, and guess what? You're going to want some power in there instead of Profar, right? And so I think Rooker would have been nice to have as a righty. If Torey Lovello brings a lefty into the game, you have Rooker that can come off the bench and counteract that. So that's kind of my thinking about that. So Azocar for me was a little bit of a surprise. But CJ Abrams now, I apologize for the long pauses. I'm just trying to go through situations a little bit in my head, like why kind of the Padres were thinking this. I think with Azocar up, maybe they're like, okay, if he's the fourth outfielder, is Abrams also like that as well? Doesn't have a ton of power right now. He'll get stronger and have more power, I think. But you have Azocar and Abrams. Okay, you have Azocar up there right now, so Abrams doesn't have to feel the pressure of having to quickly learn center field, right? Azocar played center field a lot during spring, so he can be a backup to Grisham in center. And I'm sure he can play the other two outfield positions as well. So maybe that's why, they were scared with the fact of having CJ be a backup center fielder to start the season when he played right field in the only spring training outfield game that he played in, the opportunity that he played. or the game that he played, the only opportunity that he had in the outfield, he played right, not even center. And now you're going to expect him to be a backup center fielder on opening day. I don't think the Padres like that. So I think that's a big reason as well why they went with Azekar, the familiarity, him being a backup center fielder. I think those are definitely likely scenarios for, what the Padres were thinking of there. Those were kind of the only surprises. So I guess Guerra, Azekar for me. Yeah, Steven Wilson maybe a little bit, but not really, considering that it was 28 men on the roster. If it was 26, maybe Steven Wilson would have been more of a surprise. But it's not. So, again, Bob Melvin has told the media that Taylor Rogers is the closer. So give your thoughts in the comments what you think about that. Just trying to, okay, I don't see any more updates so far on Bob Melvin's comments. So let's move into or actually before we do that, let's go through some of the comments here. Again, anyone tuning in here, happy opening day. Hit that like, subscribe buttons, notification bell as well, so you don't miss any video that comes out. You don't miss when I go live. All right, let's see what the chat thinks. Gil says, Azekar is a plug-in piece anywhere in the outfield. Don't see him here the whole year. I don't see him in the majors the whole year. I think his stay in the majors will be pretty short. I think they're going to want Brent Rooker up when they realize that power's lacking to start the year. Let's see. Gil also says, Eggy Rosario, Javi Guerra, and Jose Azekar all trade assets. I mean, I don't know. I don't know about Javi Guerra. Like, maybe. But if they DFA'd him, they could have worked out a trade with another team. And you could say, well, Ben, maybe that lowers his value. And maybe. But, yeah, okay, he throws hard. But what else does he do? I'm just not that high on him, to be honest. Jose Azekar, I don't really know what you're going to get in trade value with him. Eggy Rosario, you'd get more, I think, in a trade, in terms of in return than you'd get for Jose Azekar. So they could be used, they could be traded, but I think Eggy Rosario would probably bring the most back if we're just looking at single players' value from those three guys, Rosario, Guerra, and Azekar. Gil says, by the time Tatis comes back, Abrams will have had to take some outfield reps in practice and maybe some games. Yeah, and I think that's a good aspect. Yeah, I think a good viewpoint. I think that Azekar, the Padres were worried, didn't want to have Abrams as the primary backup center fielder. Now they don't have to worry about that. They can give Abrams some more reps there if that's what they choose to do. And then by the time Tatis comes back, hopefully Abrams is healthy. Everything's going well there. And they still have confidence in Kim to be a backup utility infielder there. And they can move Abrams more into the outfield. I think that's a scenario that you definitely see happen. All right. Shall we move into the pregame show portion of episode 146? Again, thank you everyone for watching, for listening. I did want to say before we get started with this pregame portion, pregame show before every game. It could be sometimes because of work or life, shorter videos. It might just be pregame thoughts as the pregame show. During the summer, when I'm at Petco Park, hopefully I'll have the pregame show from Petco Park, inside Petco Park. So I hope you'll tune in for that. And every pregame show is not going to be an episode of the podcast. So it's not like I'm going to have like 1,000 episodes by the end of the season because I'm having pregame shows be episodes. No. Today, it's part of the episode because I just wanted to do it all at one time because it's opening day. You had the roster decisions. You had the Brent Rooker, Taylor Rogers acquisitions from the Twins. You have Paddack and Emilio Pagan being gone. So that was something to definitely talk about. You had Abrams, being on the roster. And it just made sense, just put the pregame show in, We have less than 2 hours now till first pitch. So that's something to be very, very excited about. Best day of the year for me. Masters Thursday, Tigers back. For anyone that's interested in that, under par today. That was great to see what a comeback that is right now. So this is the best sports day on the calendar so far this year. You would have wished that they weren't smushed together, the Masters and baseball, because I'm a big fan of both. And so I wanted it to kind of be spread out, not, me having, the Padres and you also have the Masters. You just want to enjoy both singly, if that's a word, if you get that. But again, pregame show, probably going to be like 20, 30 minutes before every game most times when I do have the time to do that. When I'm not, busy doing something else. And usually they're not going to be a part of an episode unless like a big move happens. And then I'll make an episode and attach the pregame show to it because I think that just makes more sense. But without further ado, let's get to the pregame show portion of this episode. Diamondbacks Padres later tonight, 9:40 Pacific time, Eastern time, 6:40 p.m. Pacific time. Pitching matchup. Madison Bumgarner for the Diamondbacks. Yu Darvish for our San Diego Padres. Bumgarner, and Darvish, this is the same pitching matchup that happened last year at Petco Park. Madison Bumgarner went 4 innings, gave up 6 runs, 7 hits, walked 3, and gave up 2 bombs. Remember, Hosmer and Myers took him deep. And then Darvish only went 2/3 of an inning longer than Bumgarner, went 4 2/3 innings, gave up 4 runs, 8 hits, walked 1, struck out 6, and also gave up 2 home runs like Bumgarner did. 2 home runs that Darvish gave up were guess who? Ketel Marte and Asdrubal Cabrera. Marte is still on the Diamondbacks. He's going to be hitting second today. Hosmer went 3 for 4, drove in 3 runs against Bumgarner in 2021. Remember, in 2020, he had like 6 RBIs or something crazy in that first game of the season in 2020 when there were no fans in the stands at Petco. But that's kind of my what to watch for here, continuing with that Hosmer point and Myers, to be honest, because Myers did really well against Bumgarner last year as well. Will Hosmer and Myers continue to mash against Bumgarner? I think that'll be big. Both are hitting in the middle of the lineup, right? You got Myers hitting 5th, Hosmer hitting 6th, back-to-back. So will they do that again this year? We'll see. I think that's something to watch for tonight. Will they be able to continue their success against Mad Bum tonight? That's my what to watch for. Again, these pregame shows, it'll usually be, obviously there's no record, so I can't do that, but the records of the team, where the Padres stand in the division, pitching matchup, relevant stats in terms of, batters and how they do against the pitchers, any notable things there, the lineups for each team, what to watch for, bullpen usage charts. I'll bring that out probably starting tomorrow because today the bullpen's fresh. They had a day off yesterday. But for anyone that's new, that wasn't in tune with the Twitter account last year, I have a bullpen usage chart that I put out every day that I think is very unique and I think that people enjoy seeing. And it displays all the relievers updated every day with moves and anything that happens. Updated with all the relievers. And for the last 5 games, the last 5 days, how many pitches did each guy throw in those last 5 days? So tomorrow you'll see kind of the layout of that. So that's probably going to be tomorrow. Bullpen's fresh. And according to Bob Melvin, Taylor Rogers is the closer. Let's get to the Padre lineup. And someone earlier in the chat asked me to give my thoughts on Austin Nola hitting leadoff. Before we get to that, here's the lineup. You got Austin Nola leading off, catching. Manny Machado hitting second, playing third. Jake Cronenworth hitting third, playing second base. Luke Voigt, the DH, batting fourth. Batting fifth, Will Myers, playing right. Batting sixth, Eric Hosmer at first. Batting seventh, Jurickson Profar, playing left. Batting eighth, Ha-Seong Kim, playing short. Abrams will start on the bench. Trent Grisham batting ninth, playing center. And so people, obviously, when they see this lineup, they're like, whoa, Austin Nola leading off. Holy cow. This is something that I didn't see. Did he? He might have led off once or twice during spring training, but I don't think people thought much of it because it's spring training. Who cares what the order is, right? Until like the very last couple games, who cares what the order is? But he was not hitting leadoff, a couple days ago when they had that, A lineup, pretty much opening day lineup in there. But he is hitting leadoff. But I do think people are kind of overreacting to Austin Nola leading off. Like, come on. He's only going to hit leadoff probably once the entire game. It's just to start the game. So I think people have taken that a little bit out of proportion with Nola leading off. And give me your thoughts in the comments. Feel free. But last year, he actually had a higher on-base percentage than Trent Grisham. Both dealt with injuries, so it's not like you're saying, hey, Ben, Trent played all 162 games. Nola didn't. That's why. He had more chances to fail. No, both didn't stay healthy all year. Nola higher on-base percentage, 340 compared to Grisham's 327. And Grisham is batting ninth, so it's not like he's like in the middle of the order. So Grisham he could lead off at some point tonight during this game. I think that Melvin likes him in the leadoff spot, and we'll see him in the leadoff spot against righties, right? But Mad Bum is a lefty, and Nola is a righty, so that split can also come into play there. So Nola leading off, I wouldn't put too much into that. Look, he gets on base pretty good. And I know Grisham has more power than Nola, but it's not like he's going to hit. It's not like he hits home runs every leadoff at bat. Like, I think they know that the bottom half of the lineup, right, Myers, Hosmer, Profar, Kim, Grisham even, isn't great power-wise. And so they want someone on base. They want a righty to face Bumgarner right out of the gate instead of a lefty-on-left matchup. So I think that's why they did that. So I wouldn't put too much into that. I would, if I was Bob Melvin, I wouldn't have run with this lineup. I don't, to be honest, I don't like having the back-to-back righties right out of the gate. I think I'd like it more staggered. Having back-to-back righties in Voigt and Myers. You have Hosmer and then Profar. So sometimes if there's a righty on the mound, then you'll have back-to-back lefties there. So there's multiple scenarios where you could have back-to-back of something. And the spring training lineups that Melvin was using late there, it was pretty much one time where it was back-to-back, and that was Nola Myers, I believe, righty-righty in the middle of the lineup. We're here, there's kind of multiple scenarios there, but other than that, I'm pretty fine with the lineup right now because that's what they have. Diamondbacks lineup, Dalton Varsho leading off, playing center. Ketel Marte batting second, playing second. David Peralta in left. Christian Walker at first. Pavin Smith in right. Carson Kelly catching. Seth Beer, designated hitter. Drew Ellis at third. And Geraldo, however you pronounce his name, Perdomo at shortstop. So, as you could tell, that's not a strong lineup there at all, really. You have Marte, Peralta, Walker, and then what else? So I think that's a lineup that Darvish likes seeing there. I think he's like, yeah, I'll go against this lineup, sure. And that's part of the reason why it's like, okay, Padres got to win this series. Let's start off this season winning this series, because you weren't able to beat teams that you should have beaten last year. That's part of the reason why you collapsed. That's part of the reason why you didn't make the playoffs. You were like 500 against those teams that were under 500, while the Dodgers and Giants were winning like 75% of those games. So this lineup isn't strong. Padres got to capitalize off of that. It's as simple as that. Kwan says he would have gone with Grisham, Nola, Cronenworth, Machado, Voit, Myers, Hosmer, Profar, Kim. I don't think Nola should be hitting second. If you're going to do anything, it's lead off or more at the bottom of the lineup. Hitting second is for usually an all-star, because they at least have someone on base. He could get on base for that 3-hitter, 4-hitter. I don't think you really put that for Nola hitting second. But yeah, we all have different opinions, and that's what's great about this. All right, this has been fun. Episode 146 of the Talking Friars Podcast. Ben Fadden, your host, signing off. Happy opening day, everyone. Thank you so much for watching and listening. See ya.